Good morning. This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. I'm Tom Mackenzie alongside Caroline Hepker, live from Westminster as a new era in British politics begins. We are live on Bloomberg TV and radio. These are the stories that set your agenda. Labour set for a landslide win as official results roll in, with voters turning on the Tories after 14 years in power.
Tonight, people here and around the country have spoken, and they're ready for change, to end the politics of performance and return to politics as public service.
UK equity futures point higher. The pound is steady as investors herald a new political dawn in British politics. Plus, we have a great lineup of guests over the course of the next 2 hours. We're going to bring you analysis and reaction throughout, with a focus, of course, on the politics, but also the market reaction to the now and to the future. We now have as well the incoming Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, having secured that majority plus 326 seats in the House of Commons. Keir Starmer. We are going to be crossing live to that speech. The outgoing Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, has conceded that Labour have won. Let's listen in to Keir Starmer.
And across our country, people will be waking up to the news, relieved that a weight has been lifted, a burden finally removed from the shoulders of this great nation. And now we can look forward again, walk into the morning, the sunlight of hope, pale at first, but getting stronger through the day, shining once again on a country with the opportunity, after 14 years, to get its future back. And I want to thank each and every one of you here for campaigning so hard for change. And not just in this campaign either. Also for these 4.5 years changing our party. The Labour movement is always everything's achieved, past and future, down to the efforts of its people. So thank you truly. You have changed our country. But a mandate like this comes with a great responsibility. Our task is nothing less than renewing the ideas that hold this country together. National renewal. Whoever you are, wherever you started in life, if you work hard, if you play by the rules, this country should give you a fair chance to get on. It should always respect your contribution, and we have to restore that. And alongside that, we have to return politics to public service. Show that politics can be a force for good. Make no mistake, that is the great test of politics in this era. The fight for trust is the battle that defines our age. It is why we've campaigned so hard on demonstrating we are fit for public service. Service is the precondition for hope. Respect, the bond that can unite a country. Together, the values of this changed Labour Party are the guiding principle for a new government. Country first, party second. That is the responsibility of this mandate. You know, 14 years ago, we were told that we're all in it together. I say to the British people today, imagine what we can do if that were actually true. So, by all means, enjoy this moment. Nobody can say you haven't waited patiently. Enjoy the feeling of waking up on a morning like this, with the emotion that you do see the country through the same eyes. Hold on to it, because it is what unity is made from. But use it to show to the rest of the country, as we must, that this party has changed, that we will serve them faithfully, govern for every single person in this country. But also, don't forget how we got here. This morning, we can see that the British people have voted to turn the page on 14 years. But don't pretend that there was anything inevitable about that. There's nothing preordained in politics. Election victories don't fall from the sky. They're hard won and hard fought for. And this one could only be won by a changed Labour Party. We have the chance to repair our public services because we changed the party. We have the chance to make work pay because we changed the party. We have the chance to deliver for working people, young people, vulnerable people, the poorest in our society, because we changed the party. Country first, party second isn't a slogan. It's the guiding principle everything we have done and must keep on doing. On the economy, on national security, on protecting our borders. The British people had to look us in the eye and see that we can serve their interests. And that work doesn't stop now. It never stops. The changes we've made are permanent, irreversible, and we must keep going. We ran as a changed Labour Party, and we will govern as a changed Labour Party. I don't promise you it will be easy. Changing a country is not like flicking a switch. It's hard work, patient work, determined work, and we will have to get moving immediately. But even when the going gets tough, and it will, remember, tonight and always, what this is all about. Now, I may have mentioned my parents a few times in this campaign, once or twice. But the sense of security we had, the comfort they took from believing that Britain would always be better for their children, the hope, not high-minded, not idealistic, but a hope that working-class families like mine could build their lives around. It is a hope that may not burn brightly in Britain at the moment, but we have earned the mandate to relight the fire. That is the purpose of this party and of this government. We said we would end the chaos, and we will. We said we would turn the page, and we have. Today we start the next chapter, begin the work of change, the mission of national renewal, and start to rebuild our country. Thank you. Thank you. you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Right.
That is, of course, the incoming British Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, with the Labour Party having secured the incoming British Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, speaking after the party secures the majority that it needs, of course, to govern, with the exit polls suggesting it will be a significant majority, the biggest majority we've seen since 1997. Alongside me, Caroline Hepker from Bloomberg Radio, someone with deep experience following UK politics. It is a changed chapter. It is a new chapter for the UK. He was talking about national renewal, talking about the fact that they have this significant mandate from the British people, but also significant responsibility as well. What else stood out to you, Caroline, from that speech that we heard from the incoming British Prime Minister?
I think it's absolutely fascinating. Rishi Sunak called this snap election here in the UK 6 weeks ago in the pouring rain. The rebuke to the Conservatives has been extreme. The incoming new Prime Minister, I think, has got a huge job to do. He also talked about a changed Labour Party. He ran on the single word, really, change. So the rebuke to the Conservatives is strong. A changed Labour Party. He was also implying that we had to stay, that the Labour Party had to deliver in terms of the change. That really was a call to unity for the party, to stay united. Remember the difference between 2019 and now. You had Jeremy Corbyn then. Keir Starmer has really renewed the party and now has won today.
And as you say, the biggest, and as you nod to, the biggest defeat that the Labour Party faced in 2019 since about the 1930s. So that reversal of fortunes over the last 4.5, 5 years, significant, of course. He says it's a changed Labour Party. He says they will govern as a changed Labour Party, talking about the fact that they can reignite and relight the fire in terms of hope for the British people, nodding to the challenges that the British population has faced over the last few years. 14 years, of course, of Conservative rule. The Prime Minister, outgoing Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, has conceded. And now, of course, the process in place, we will see, likely, the British Prime Minister, the outgoing British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, going to of course, the King to get that approval. And then it will be the turn of Keir Starmer.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's extraordinary that you've seen a record number of Conservative ministers ousted. Under the surface, though, of this landslide victory, you've also got the story of reform. Nigel Farage won his seat, for the 8th time.
Well, let's get more details on that and bring in Bloomberg's Alex Morgan standing by for a closer look at the results. Alex.
Well, you guys were talking there about change. What does change actually look like when you put it on a bar chart? Let's have a look at this. You're talking about that Labour's result in 2019 being the worst since the 1930s. What a turnaround. Here we are, just gone 5 o'clock in the morning in the UK. Labour well over the 326 mark they need to get an outright majority in the House of Commons. The Conservative Party, at the moment, trailing on 76 seats. There's a lot to unpack from these numbers, not least the return of the Liberal Democrats, seemingly coming back as the third force in British politics. The SNP, the Scottish National Party, of course, who've been campaigning for a second referendum on Scottish independence. It seems their vote has collapsed. Labour regaining ground in Scotland. And the Reform Party of Nigel Farage, here already having won 4 seats. The exit poll predicting more. Let's show you this, but on a map. All of this is on Bloomberg.com. You can have a go yourself, looking at the interactive tracker as the results come in. And as you can see, it's a sea of red and a sea of white dots. The white dots showing where Labour is picking up seats. And really, from Scotland all the way through the Conservative heartlands, I mean, they even picked up Aldershot, the home of the British military. Labour sweeping the board. Caroline was talking there about reform being a real sort of influence, and that is true. Even in seats they're not winning, the Reform Party of Nigel Farage positioning themselves to the right of the Tories, coming second in a lot of seats. That, of course, is changing the national picture.
Bloomberg's Alex Morgan breaking down the electoral data for us. Alex, thank you very much indeed. There are plenty of great guests ahead as we, of course, continue to cover the outcome of this UK election, plus many more throughout the day. We're going to do deep dive as well in terms of what it means for the economy of the UK and these markets. Stay with us. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. We are live on Bloomberg TV and radio outside, of course, the Palace of Westminster, the Houses of Parliament here in London, alongside Caroline Hepker from Bloomberg Radio. The British Prime Minister, outgoing Rishi Sunak, has conceded defeat. The Labour Party have secured the majority. Keir Starmer will be the next British Prime Minister. It is a new chapter for the UK, and it is a significant turnaround of fortunes for this Labour Party after 14 years of Conservative Party rule.
Yeah, I think it's extraordinary because now we have to think about what the incoming Labour Party is going to deliver. Rachel Reeves, when I interviewed her only a few months ago, she was talking about securonomics. When Bloomberg has done the analysis of the manifesto plans from Labour, though, the numbers are extremely small. So I think there is a question, despite this landslide victory, which I will not diminish, there is a question, though, about what the mandate of the Labour Party is actually going to be, because the numbers in terms of spending and taxation were under £10 billion a year, i.e. not very much, and yet Keir Starmer wants to change the country, wants to deliver planning reform, wants to deliver on the NHS and all of the other priorities that the UK has. How is he going to do that without changing the fiscal rules? There are going to be a lot of questions now around the manifesto. The kicking that the Conservative Party has got from voters here in the UK is self-evident that their verdict on the 14 years of Rishi Sunak and all the other prime ministers that we've had under the Conservatives is clear, but actually what we get from Labour, much less clear for the next 5 years.
Well, let's
now.
pick up on that and bring in Daniel Murray right now, our next guest, to take a view in terms of how this impacts UK markets and UK assets. EFG Asset Management Deputy CIO and Global Head of Research. Daniel, thanks for joining us. If we're still connected to you, what do you think the market impact of this is going to be? It's essentially come in line with the polls. Do you want to be leaning into UK assets at this point?
I think it's a super interesting result. And I think whereas historically Labour governments have been viewed negatively by markets, actually Keir Starmer and the party have done a lot of hard work to reassure markets that this Labour government is going to be relatively business friendly, whether that's in terms of committing not raising taxes, whether it's in terms of committing to try to pursue pro-growth policies. And I think also we shouldn't forget is the fact that the Labour Party business.
Okay, it seems like we have a connection issue. Daniel, can you still hear me? This sometimes happens live TV. Just checking if you still hear me, Daniel.
I can still hear you. Can you hear me, Tom?
Okay. You were saying that this was, you've been hearing a relatively constructive view in your take, at least from this Labour Party. Just pick up from there and what it means for risk assets here.
Yeah, so exactly. So I think actually historically Labour governments have been viewed negatively by markets because they've been viewed as high tax and high spend. But I think this Labour government, it's pledged to not raise any of the main taxes. It's pledged to invest in the economy and pursue pro-growth policies. And also it's pledged to create stronger ties with Europe, which should also be relatively business friendly. So I think overall it's a reasonably positive and supportive step for markets.
Daniel, Keir Starmer, in one interview, talked about how he would quite like economic growth of 2.5%, something similar to what we had in the Tony Blair era. Of course, since 2010, UK growth has been much weaker, about 1.6% on average. Are you hopeful that we could get up into a 2% level for economic growth?
I think 2.5% is pushing it, just given the underlying demographics, the pushback against immigration and productivity trends. But I think that if the Labour government could achieve growth, say, in the high ones or maybe low twos, then that would be a great achievement.
What are we going to be looking for, Daniel, when it comes to the first 100 days from this incoming Labour government? Where will your lens be?
I think what we'll be looking for is just an adherence to the manifesto pledges the Labour Party made in terms of the sorts of policies that are going to remain business friendly. I think the real test actually is going to come in what will likely be an autumn budget, and then we'll see a bit more colour in terms of the economic policies, how they exactly intend to finance, I think as Caroline was alluding to, and what sort of policies they're going to implement that will support business and hopefully reinvigorate growth. But I think the first 100 days, we just need to see steady as she goes, and then that will lead into the autumn budget. give us a little bit more colour as to how they intend to carry out their plans.
OK, the real test being the autumn budget as we look through the first 100 days. Daniel Murray, Deputy CIO and Global Head of Research at EFG Asset Management. Thank you very much indeed. Coming up, plenty of other great guests ahead as we cover the outcome of the UK election. Rishi Sunak conceding defeat in the last hour. Stay with us. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back. Let's check in on how the Asian markets are performing so far this Friday. Check in with Avril Hong, standing by for us in Singapore. Avril.
Yeah, guys, really interesting to see how the UK election results have crossed currents for the Japanese yen as the pound has been strengthening, especially in the past hour or so. We've seen that weakness really coming through on the US dollar, 3-week lows. But of course, the root cause for this is the deflationary narrative coming out of the US and how the US economic data is really exacerbating the rate cut bets. We're going to be keeping a close watch on the US jobs data. But given the soft dollar, that's helping the Japanese currency. It started the day at around 161.4. Look at where it's sitting now. But this actually is a much bigger move compared to what we're seeing on the recovery in the Chinese yuan. It pales in comparison to the recovery in the Japanese currency. Let's flip the board because that underperformance, I think, is also playing out in equities, especially given those continued concerns dogging the Chinese economy, the Hang Seng CSI 300 in the doldrums today on a day where the Nikkei itself has been paring gains amid the Japanese currency recovery. Tom.
OK, Avril Hong with a check on the Asian markets. Thank you very much indeed. Let's get you up to speed on what has been crossing a course out of the UK when it comes to the politics here. We have changed a chapter. The incoming Labour government having secured that majority of more than 326 seats, of course, out of a parliamentary seat count of 650. It is set for the biggest majority since 1997, of course, the era of Tony Blair. Keir Starmer will be the incoming UK Prime Minister. Rishi Sunak has conceded, and already the accusations are flying from some of the ex-ministers, the likes of the Defence Secretary, outgoing Defence Secretary Grant Shapps, who lost his seat and again has fired a broadside at this Conservative Party, which is facing potentially its worst defeat on record. We're going to bring you all the latest, of course, on the UK elections as they continue to unfold. Stay with us. This is Bloomberg. Good morning, this is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. I'm Tom McKenzie alongside Caroline Hecker, live from Westminster as a new era in British politics begins. We are live on Bloomberg TV and radio. These are the stories that set your agenda. Labour set for a landslide win as official results roll in, with voters turning on the Tories after 14 years in power. Rishi Sunak has conceded defeat. Keir Starmer set to become the UK's next Prime Minister. UK equity futures point higher and the pound is steady as investors herald a new political dawn in Britain. Plus, we have a great lineup of guests ahead. We're going to bring you analysis and reaction as the final results roll in. Keir Starmer then has promised national renewal, with his Labour Party heading towards a resounding win in the UK general election. Starmer is set to become the next Prime Minister, with Labour inflicting a heavy election defeat on Rishi Sunak's Conservatives. Starmer spoke to supporters just moments ago.
We did it! You campaigned for it, you fought for it, you voted for it, and now it has arrived. Change begins now.
A short time ago, Rishi Sunak conceded defeat following a disastrous election campaign. The heavy defeat, which has seen several cabinet ministers lose their seats, will bring to an end 14 years of Conservative rule.
The Labour Party has won this general election, and I have called Sir Keir Starmer to congratulate him on his victory. Today, power will change hands in a peaceful and orderly manner, with goodwill on all sides. That is something that should give us all confidence in our country's stability and future. The British people have delivered a sobering verdict tonight. There is much to learn and reflect on, and I take responsibility for the loss.
The outgoing British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak speaking there. Let's check in on UK assets then. The pound is relatively steady at 127 versus the US dollar. FTSE 100 futures pointing high by 0.2%. FTSE 250 futures pointing to gains of around 0.4%. This is a result that was predicted by the polls. No big shock for these markets. It does not, though, dilute the significance of this moment, Caroline. Bringing you at this point with that deep expertise on UK politics, what are you watching for in the next few days ahead? What is the significance around the economic policies of this incoming Labour government?
Look, I think it's very interesting because actually the UK economy is doing a little bit better right now. We've certainly had more economic growth in the first quarter than we'd anticipated. Living standards are starting to shift in the sense that inflation is coming down and wages are going up. So actually the picture looks a little bit better. We're also expecting that first interest rate cut in the summer potentially from the Bank of England. So it is looking like things are brighter. It is simply that the obstacle of 5 prime ministers over the course of 14 years where real disposable incomes have been cut, have fallen over that time period. And you had 3 prime ministers in 1 year in 2022. That hurdle was simply too great to get over with the electorate, who are utterly dissatisfied, or at least have said so at the ballot box.
Within the Labour Party manifesto, there was a focus on industrial policy.
Yes.
There was a focus on great British energy. Those plans will take time to come to the fore. The investment that they have to put into some of those projects is less than maybe they would have hoped.
Yeah.
In terms of the first 100 days, what are the crucial steps that we're looking for from the incoming Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, and the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer?
It's going to be about planning reform, the promise to build more houses, 1.5 million. Exactly. You know the number they've got through. They've had cut through
How
with that
realistic do you think that
message.
is?
Look, historically, housing targets have never been met. So, they're going to have to do something very significant to change that. The other issue is about workers' rights, very close to Angela Rayner's heart, for example, who's going to be in that top tier of Labour leadership, along with Starmer and with Rachel Reeves. I think the issue is going to be how bold will the autumn statement actually be, given that they've run on this manifesto with very few promises for any big change in terms of numbers, tax and spending. Can they really do anything significant in autumn? I was speaking to Miles Selleck, for example, at the City UK recently. He was saying, is it going to be 18 to 24 months' time that they then have to pull that lever, marked higher taxes? Do remember that's the thing, in a way, that has led the Conservatives to be ousted, because we've had the highest tax rate in something like 70 years. We had a 40-year spike in terms of the inflation in the UK. Those are the things that led to the trouncing for the former Prime Minister, I should say, Rishi Sunak.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was speaking to a CEO of a major UK bank saying that, in their opinion, essentially Rachel Reeves and Jeremy Hunt, the outgoing Chancellor of the Exchequer, were interchangeable. That's how relaxed they were about the prospects of Rachel Reeves as Chancellor. Just one view, but a senior executive within the banking space here.
Well, I would say that there is another view, and that is that the Labour Party is looking to be quite interventionist. If you read into the manifesto and all of the different sectors that they want government to have a say in, it's going to be a very different hue of government in the UK.
For the market check then, and the market response to this, we're going to go to Joe Easton, but first let's go to Alex Morgan, who's standing by for a closer look at the results that have been coming through in terms of the politics, the seats and the changes there. Alex.
Good morning, both. This is our Bloomberg Interactive Tracker. You can have it on a big screen like this, or indeed on your phone in your pocket. It's on Bloomberg.com. It's updating in real time as we're getting in those constituency results. And while we know who the winner is, Labour now on 371 seats, we're getting a sense of the national picture. And that is, of course, of a Tory rout, particularly in their heartlands. And actually, the collapse of the Conservative vote, both of you are picking up on that, as actually one of the driving forces behind the Labour majority, not necessarily a wave of love for a new Labour government, but a real sense of frustration with the last 14 years. And the threats to the Conservatives are coming on 2 flanks, really. You've got a threat in their heartlands in sort of the south-east from the Liberal Democrats. In fact, the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, narrowly clung on to his seat in Godalming and Ash. Many people had thought he would be a goner. The result there, really coming down to hundreds of votes. But you've also got a threat on the right of the party. And that's from figures like Nigel Farage of the Reform Party. Now, at the beginning of the campaign, Farage wasn't even in the race. He said he was going to support Donald Trump in the States. He had a dramatic intervention and then picked up the Conservative Conservative held seat of Clacton. Now, what you're seeing here is the Chancellor Jeremy Hunt's Godalming and Ash constituency. Look how close that was. That is how close they came to unseating, and the Liberal Democrats to unseating the Chancellor. And when it came to Farage in Clacton, well, that is not close at all. He really stomped the Tories there.
Alex Morgan breaking down the electoral data for us. Alex, thank you very much indeed. Caroline, I'm going to have to let you go. But before we do, in terms of some of the big names that have fallen as well within the cabinet, or the previous cabinet, the cabinet of Rishi Sunak, including the likes of Penny Mordaunt, but also Gillian Keegan, Education Secretary, former Education Secretary now, Therese Coffey, Johnny Mercer, Alex Chalk, and arguably the biggest name so far to fall out in terms of the cabinet minister positions. Grant Shapps, of course, Defence Minister, but has held a number of different ministry officials, Grant Shapps, and he took a broadside at this Conservative Party and the divisions within it, saying this was less about a Labour win, more about a Conservative Party loss. Yeah,
absolutely. And Suella Braverman saying, we did not keep our promises. I'm sorry that the party did not listen to you, talking about the British electorate. Another significant minister. Kemeny Badenoch, for example, held on to her seat. Look, there's going to be a lot of thinking, a huge amount of turmoil in what is left, the tiny rump, frankly, of the Conservative Party in Parliament and across the country as to why they lost, why they didn't deliver what voters wanted. There'll be a lot of soul-searching, I think, as Labour comes into power.
And from a market's perspective, does the size of the majority that the Labour Party is set for, is that a positive in terms of implementing policy, or is it a risk factor for these markets if that is power that is unchecked?
Well, that was the accusation from the Conservatives, this idea of a supermajority, which is meaningless in the parliamentary system here in the UK. But we shall see. Is it going to be more delivery, or is it going to be a more fractious party, or are they going to have to be under pressure to do more? Caroline
Hepker from Bloomberg Radio, who's been speaking to everyone across the spectrum in terms of UK politics in the lead up to this vote. Caroline, thank you very much indeed. Going to let Caroline go. Let's have a look now what the election results could mean for UK home builders and stocks. Let's bring in Joe Easton from our equities team for a deep dive on the equity market response to this result. Joe.
Well, for home builders, Tom, the Labour government has really been focusing on their supply policy. So they're looking to build around 1.5 million new homes over the next 5 years. That's what they said in their manifesto. And of course, with this big majority projected, we'll see if they can actually enact some of these. So they're looking to build those homes by announcing a number of new planning reform offices that will then put pressure on councils to then build the homes. Now, the Conservatives also announced a similar policy in terms of the amount of homes they want to build, but really went for a more tax-cutting, traditional Conservative approach in terms of introducing new measures on Help to Buy and also reducing taxes on landlords when they sell their properties to tenants. But the market analysts, including those at RBC, they much prefer the Labour approach in terms of actually increasing supply, because demand for houses isn't actually weak at the moment. The only thing that is constraining it is the mortgage rates, and we have actually seen a bit of a rebound in the housing stocks this year, with a number of the big ones gaining, and also because of the policies that Labour have been announcing in their manifesto ahead of this, we've seen the likes of Vistry and MJ Gleeson, which we can see down the bottom there, rallying, because those are the ones that could be getting these contracts on new houses, new social housing. The ones at the top there, Pearson and Taylor Wimpey, they've done OK, but that's more been driven by the rates theme that Caroline has been talking about there, in terms of when interest rates come down, the mortgage market should rebound, and therefore we'll see demand come back into the market. It's really about the government coming in. Can they increase the supply enough to meet that? And there is also, of course, the key overhang here, which is the Bank of England. It's been too early for the Bank of England to cut rates this summer, but we may well see that soon. And this is a fantastic chart down the bottom. You see the Bank of England rates shooting up, the house builder stocks slumping. And if the government is stable, we could potentially see both of those trends go the other way. The market's positive on home builders following this exit poll result.
OK, equities reporter Joe Easton on the implications of the house builders here in the UK on the back of this vote. Joe, thank you very much indeed. Over to another election happening in Europe this week. We shouldn't lose, of course, the focus on France as well. Polls in that country show Marine Le Pen's national rally is set to fall well short of an absolute majority in the parliamentary election on Sunday. For more, let's bring in Bloomberg's senior editor on EMEA markets, Phil Serafino, in Paris. Phil, where do we stand then going into that final day of campaigning?
Yeah, as you said, Tom, the polls that came out late yesterday show Le Pen falling well short of a majority. The election it's a fairly complicated system, 577 seats in Parliament. In many cases, there were 3 or 4 candidates going into this final round. A lot of those candidates have decided to withdraw to set up a head-to-head contest with the National Rally in a lot of districts. So, the expectation from the polls is that, yes, Le Pen will not succeed in getting a majority in the National Assembly. You have to see the final outcome. The polls aren't votes. But if this happens, that means there's going to be a problem for France come Monday morning. What kind of government do they appoint with no party with a clear majority? It's a bit of a leap into the great unknown.
OK, a leap into the great unknown. Phil Serafino, as we look ahead to the final round of voting in those French parliamentary elections, of course, that final round taking place on Sunday. We'll have the exit polls of France on Sunday evening. Phil, thank you very much indeed. Let's get a roundup of other stories making the news now with Jen Zabasaja. Jen.
Yeah, good morning to you, Tom. Let's start here. Joe Biden's re-election campaign limped into the Independence Day holiday as the U.S. president tries to salvage his candidacy. Some leading Democratic governors offered some of the strongest words of support yet for Biden's bid for re-election after a crisis meeting at the White House, where it's believed the 81-year-old has admitted he will have to work a reduced schedule to avoid fatigue. Party anxiety is mounting over Biden's chances of beating former President Donald Trump in November, with polls showing he's losing ground to his Republican opponent after a poor debate performance last week. A senior U.S. official says Hamas has broadly agreed to the framework of a ceasefire proposal with Israel. The response was received earlier this week through Qatari officials. The U.S. official calls the development encouraging, saying it may provide the basis for an agreement to free some of the Israeli hostages from Gaza. Israel now said to be sending a delegation to Qatar for further talks. And finally, Hurricane Beryl is barreling towards Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula as local authorities move to evacuate residents from along the storm's path. It's expected to weaken before making landfall in the Yucatan, bringing strong winds, a dangerous storm surge, as well as damaging waves. The Tulum airport has suspended operations, and Cancun's airport has also canceled flights. Beryl has already left a trail of destruction through the Caribbean, and earlier this week, its winds reached a rare Category 5 strength. Tom?
Jen Zabasaja with a roundup of the other news today. Thank you, Jen. Coming up, we're going to be hearing from Chief Economist at the Bank of Singapore, Mansoor Mohi-uddin, and get his view on the pound, the impact on sterling. Of course, on the back of these results, plenty of other great guests as well for the market analysis on the UK political picture. Stay with us. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. We are live on Bloomberg TV and radio outside, of course, the Palace of Westminster here in London on the back of this historic vote. Yes, ending 14 years of Conservative rule. The Labour Party will take over. They have secured that majority. And the next Prime Minister of the UK will be Keir Starmer. Keir Starmer is the incoming Prime Minister. Rishi Sunak is the outgoing Prime Minister, conceding defeat, Rishi Sunak, and taking responsibility. Keir Starmer, the incoming Prime Minister, saying it is a changed Labour Party and they will govern in a changed way. Labour currently have 378 seats, well above the 326 needed for a majority, on course, according to the exit polls, of plus 400 seats. The Conservatives set for one of their worst election nights in history. For the market analysis and a view on what this means for UK assets, very pleased to see we can now bring in Mansoor Mohi-uddin, Chief Economist at Bank of Singapore. Mansoor, thanks for joining us. A line from your notes stands out to me right now. The prospects of a stable government plus BOE rate cuts are likely to benefit UK assets. How does that look? How does that shape up? What does that benefit look like?
Yeah, thanks very much, Tom. I do think the election result finally clears away all this political uncertainty we've had. We've had a really dismal decade of disorder in politics, economic instability, market underperformance. Now, if we can get a stable government for the next 5 years, then investors and companies can plan for the future, which should be good for growth. And if you get some reforms, particularly to the housing market, perhaps a closer trading relationship with the European Union, then that should also benefit UK assets and the pound as well.
The Labour Party, Keir Starmer, he's talked about 2.5% growth, the kind of growth that we had under former Prime Minister Tony Blair, former Labour Prime Minister, of course, Tony Blair. Is 2.5% realistic, Mansoor, for the UK? What would we need to get 2.5% growth? And if it's not realistic, what is your outlook for UK growth?
Sure, yeah, 2.5% is definitely ambitious, given now we've got all the ageing population in the UK. We've got to have much more increased defence spending. We've got the climate transition as well. So it's going to be tough to get 2.5% growth. We think that growth is accelerating in the UK. We had recessions last year. I think we get just below 1% growth this year, about 1.5% next year. But to get to 2.5% growth, Tom, you really need to see a lot of structural reforms, a lot more investment. The new government has a chance to do that, but it will really have to push things hard in the next few years.
Do you see the incoming Prime Minister Keir Starmer getting a lift from a Bank of England cut in August? Is that priced in for you at this point?
Yeah, I think the markets expect now, with inflation back at the Bank of England's 2% target, we should get a rate cut in August and again in November. So that'll give a tailwind to UK assets. Plus, of course, now with the election result out of the way. What the markets will be really hoping for, though, is if we get sustained rate cuts throughout both the rest of this year and for next year as well. That would then really help lift the UK stock market.
What does it mean then, Mansoor, for the pound in that context? The stability of this government and then the expectations of rate cuts from the Bank of England, potentially and arguably pushing on the other side of the pound. We've seen strength versus euro, around 2% year-to-date gains coming through for pound versus euro. Does that have momentum, or is it capped by cuts from the Bank of England?
No, I think the pound's momentum will continue. I mean, obviously, the Bank of England rate cuts are a minor headwind at this stage. But other central banks are going to be cutting interest rates. We expect the European Central Bank will make a couple more cuts this year. The Federal Reserve, we anticipate cutting from September as well. So if all the major central banks are cutting rates, then what's going to help the pound is the renewed political stability from this election result, but also the chances on structural reforms. And if those reforms really start bearing fruit, then the pound's outlook actually looks considerably better. Just remember, the pound is trading now at 128. It was at 150 on the day of the Brexit vote. So the pound is still very undervalued by long-term measures.
OK, Mansoor, Mohi-uddin, Chief Economist at Bank of Singapore, with a view there in terms of what this electoral victory for the Labour Party will mean, could mean for this UK economy. You're currently looking at the pound at 127 versus the US dollar. FTSE 100 futures pointed to gains of around 0.2%. Of course, the British Prime Minister, incoming British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, hailing, of course, the victory of his Labour Party, saying the hard work starts now. This is a new chapter, he says, for Britain. We're going to bring you the latest on the UK elections, of course, as that detail continues to come through. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. We are live on Bloomberg TV and radio as the incoming UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer says that the British government and this country should prepare for a period of national renewal. We look, of course, at the challenges facing this incoming government. Yes, they have secured that majority. The exit polls suggest they are on course for more than 400 seats in this parliament of 650. The first 100 days are going to be crucial, but then, of course, the autumn statement with the incoming Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, will be scrutinised, of course, by the markets. Currently, the FTSE 100 futures are pointing to gains of around 0.2%. This is the question mark, though, around the UK budget. Deficit forecasts widening, as you can see, since May. In fact, the deficit, the UK's 2025 budget deficit, has increased to running at plus and above 3%, 3.15% of GDP. That is a reminder of the constraints on the incoming government when it comes to the fiscal spend that they might want to be able to push through, and that is partly why, part of the rationale for why they have revised some of those spending plans. We also look then at the equity market story, as Bank of America's survey suggests that fund flows now are increasing into UK equities on the prospects of this political stability. UK mid-cap stocks then in focus. FTSE 250 futures pointing higher in the session so far today. To what extent are they going to benefit from Labour's spending plans? We know, of course, that the property companies, the real estate companies, the home builders will be in focus with that plan around reforms to the planning regime and that target of 1.5 million homes built over the next Parliament. We're also going to be focusing on utilities and energy companies as well. Potential windfall taxes coming through for oil and gas. There's plenty more coming up, including the scrutiny of the equity market, potential impact of this victory by the Labour Party. We have plenty more guests for the analysis. Stay with us. This is Bloomberg. Good morning, this is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. I'm Tom Mackenzie, outside the Palace of Westminster in London. These are the stories that set your agenda. Labour claims victory in the UK's general election, set for a landslide win as official results roll in, with voters turning on the Tories after 14 years in power.
We can look forward again, walk into the morning, the sunlight of hope, pale at first, but getting stronger through the day.
UK equity futures point higher, the pound gaining as investors herald a new political dawn in British politics. Plus, we have a great lineup of guests over the course of the next hour. We're going to bring you analysis and reaction throughout, with, of course, the focus on the impacts for the UK economy and UK assets as well. Let's get you up to date on the politics, though. Keir Starmer set to become the next Prime Minister of the UK, with Labour inflicting a heavy election defeat on Rishi Sunak's Conservatives. Starmer has promised national renewal, with his Labour Party heading towards a significant majority in Parliament. Starmer says change is coming.
It's the guiding principle, everything we have done and must keep on doing. On the economy, on national security, on protecting our borders. The British people had to look us in the eye and see that we can serve their interests. And that work doesn't stop now. It never stops. The changes we've made are permanent, irreversible, and we must keep going. We ran as a changed Labour Party, and we will govern as a changed Labour Party.
And a short time ago, Rishi Sunak conceded the election following a disastrous campaign. The heavy defeat, which has seen several cabinet ministers lose their seats, will bring to an end 14 years of Conservative rule.
The Labour Party has won this general election, and I have called Sir Keir Starmer to congratulate him on his victory. Today, power will change hands in a peaceful and orderly manner, with goodwill on all sides. That is something that should give us all confidence in our country's stability and future. The British people have delivered a sobering verdict tonight. There is much to learn and reflect on, and I take responsibility for the loss.
Well, it is a significant new chapter in British political history. The markets are taking this in their stride. The results coming in roughly in line with what the polls have been suggesting over the last 6 weeks. Let's check in on the pound right now. 127. A little bit of upside coming through versus the US dollar. The pound, by the way, up versus the euro year to date around 2%. Here's some other context as well in terms of what's going on with the pound. Stronger for the 7th straight day. The 7th straight day, that's the longest streak in 4 years. FTSE 100 futures pointing to upside of around 0.2%. The smaller cap 250 as well, also pointing to gains. Let's get the latest in terms of how the political arithmetic is shaping up in the Palace of Westminster behind me, and will be in terms of those seats. And bring in Bloomberg's Alex Morgan for a closer look at the results, and we'll continue, of course, to keep an eye on the market impact. But Alex, you've been monitoring the seats and how all that has been unfolding for us.
Good morning, Tom. Yeah, well, it makes it very easy to monitor when the map behind me here, the Bloomberg Live tracker, is updating in real time. Now, 90% of constituencies declared. And when you're thinking about the majority and why these little dots matter, what we are looking at is a realignment in British politics. We are seeing Labour demolish the Conservatives with the help, it's worth saying, of Nigel Farage's right-wing Reform Party. Nigel Farage wasn't even going to stand in this election at the beginning, but his party coming second, in fact, chopping down the Conservative vote in many seats, which led to the Tories, in many cases, losing their overall majority in those seats. Now, why does this matter? Why does any of this matter? This is a huge change. Remember 2019? Boris Johnson got an 80-seat majority, get Brexit done. The Conservatives seemed poised for maybe 10 years, people were saying, in government. In 5, they have collapsed. Currently, well, you can see here, 99. They're currently below 100 seats, while Labour charge ahead on 390. And look at that, the rise of the others, the other parties here. You're seeing Reform, Nigel Farage's new party, picking up 4 seats. They may not be winning a huge number of seats, but as I say, taking a huge chunk of the share in many seats the Conservatives would have been defending or eyeing. You've also got the collapse in Scotland of the Scottish National Party. Now, of course, they've been the dominant force north of the border. They'd swept Labour aside. They've been pushing for a second Scottish independence referendum. Now they're below 10. And the re-emergence of the Liberal Democrats as the third political force in Britain. They've got more than 5 times the number of MPs they got in 2019. There's a sense then, Tom, that yes, Labour's victory is a mile wide, but in many cases an inch deep, as people are expressing frustration with the Conservatives, a lot of support going to independent candidates and also new parties like Reform. So Keir Starmer celebrating this big win, and it is a big win. But there is a sense that Labour are going to have to win over a very cynical electorate, even with that kind of majority.
That's really important context, isn't it, in terms of being a mile wide and an inch deep. Alex Morgan breaking down the electoral data for us with the update there as Labour close in on 400 seats. Alex, thank you very much indeed. For the market view then, let's bring in Peter Schaffrik right now, Chief European Macro Strategist at RBC Capital Markets, joining us on Abingdon Green outside the Palace of Westminster. Peter, thanks for joining us on this wet but momentous day. What do you make of the market reaction there as Alex breaks down the results for us, but also reminds us that there's a bit of a challenge here for Labour as well. Despite that majority, is the market response rational for you at this point?
Well, first of all, I mean, so far the market response has been relatively muted, and I think that's because, by and large, it has been expected for quite some time, and, you know, typically the market preempts sort of a result. So, because we didn't get sort of a major upset compared to what was expected, I think the initial response has been relatively muted. Going forward, in my mind, the key thing will be, and I think you mentioned it earlier, what are they going to do with the public finances? So far, they have said that they want to take a relatively steady approach, don't want to change sort of the dynamics, want to wait for the OBR and all of these good things. And if that's indeed the case, then I think the market is probably going to take it positively.
Would you lean into gilts if that becomes the reality for this new Labour government?
Well, I think we have to differentiate a little bit. I mean, a short response is yes, but probably for very different reasons. We haven't heard from the Bank of England for a while, but now that the election's out of the way, we think that they will probably come out, and the indication is that rate cuts are coming, at least sort of 1 or 2.
You think they go in August?
We do, indeed, and we're still about 10 basis points away from pricing that fully, so that should give us a positive momentum. But, you know, back to the Labour and the public finances, I mean, one of the things that we have seen is there was a bit of angst, of course, and that has been around ever since the Liz Truss days, and that what's going to happen with the finance, particularly at the back end of the curve, could put upside risks to gilt yields, and that would probably be arrested a little bit for the time being.
If that public spending was focused on things like CapEx versus tax cuts, would the gilt markets be more relaxed? Would they stomach that?
Well, it depends on the magnitude, I would suppose, because at the end of the day, gilt issuance will be high for years to come. We know that, particularly in net terms, when you factor in sort of what the Bank of England is releasing into the market as well. And if we go, even if it's for capex reasons, if we go significantly above that, the market might have a few wobbles, but it's certainly better than just spending it for other things.
In terms of the pound, 7 straight days of gains for the pound versus the US dollar. Does that momentum continue, or do you see a bit of profit taking at this point?
Well, it is a slightly positive story for the market, because one of the things that the market generally has been worried about when it looked at the UK was there was a lot of infighting into government. The government wasn't really functioning in that way. So now that somebody else comes in, a new government comes in, just the sheer fact that we have some kind of stability, and that hasn't indeed been sort of the hallmark of what they've been telling everyone, that should be positive sort of for the perception of the UK and ultimately also for the pound. But then again, it's all relative. We do have, for instance, in the euro area, we've got rate cuts as well. So, there's many things that come into play.
So you touch on this, and I want to push a little bit more. Is the UK now, with this government and where we are at, particularly given the differences versus the politics of France, Germany, arguably the US as well, are we developing a bit of a safe haven status, Peter, at this point, our assets?
Well, I think we're generally a safe haven anyway, but I think in this point in time, I do think that we probably have the benefit of the doubt for the time being. Particularly, as you mentioned, there's a little bit more turmoil just across the channel. But we'll have to see how the government then lives up after the first 100 days, what comes over the more medium term.
When it comes to the autumn statement, one of our previous guests saying for him that is crucial in terms of what comes through. Rachel Reeves, the incoming Chancellor of the Exchequer. What are you going to be watching for when it comes to that autumn statement?
Well, I mean, first of all, what they've said already is that they want to have some mild tax increases and increase in spending. That's fine. Again, we touched upon it earlier.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the size of the budget deficit really that matters. They said already that they will respect the OBR, the OBR's forecast. They don't want to change the fiscal rules significantly. So that means debt by the end of Parliament needs to be lower than where it is at the moment. I think these are all the things that the market will be watching for, and that I will be watching for very, very closely, because at the end of the day, this is what matters for the gilt market particularly.
Okay, Peter Schaffrik, thank you very much indeed. Really appreciate you coming down to Abingdon Green on this
Thank you for having me.
historic day for us, giving us that view, of course, on the gilt markets and the pound. Peter Schaffrik, Chief European Macro Strategist at RBC Capital Markets. Let's get you some other news and other stories, of course, crossing in terms of headlines this Friday. Let's bring in Jen Dabasaja for the roundup. Jen.
Yeah, thanks so much, Tom. Let's start here. Joe Biden's re-election campaign limped into the Independence Day holiday as the U.S. president tries to salvage his candidacy. Some leading Democratic governors offered some of the strongest words of support yet for Biden's bid for re-election after a crisis meeting at the White House, where it's believed the 81-year-old has admitted he will have to work a reduced schedule to avoid fatigue. Party anxiety is mounting over Biden's chances of beating former President Donald Trump in November, with polls showing he's losing ground to his Republican opponent after a poor debate performance last week. Also, a senior U.S. official says Hamas has broadly agreed to the framework of a ceasefire proposal with Israel. The response was received earlier this week through Qatari officials. The U.S. official calls the development encouraging, saying it may provide the basis for an agreement to free some Israeli hostages from Gaza. Israel is now said to be sending a delegation to Qatar for further talks. And finally, Canada has approved Glencore's $6.9 billion acquisition of Teck Resources coal business, but with several stringent conditions. Ottawa says Glencore made legally binding pledges to protect jobs and the environment for at least the next 10 years. The deal was first announced last fall, but the two companies spent much of last year in a bitter public fight after Teck rejected an unsolicited $23 billion offer from Glencore. Tom?
Jen Dabasaja, thank you very much indeed with the roundup of the other news, of course, making headlines this Friday. We appreciate it. Still ahead in our UK election special, we're going to be hearing from Rajeev de Mello, CIO at GAMA Asset Management, in just a few minutes' time, again, about the UK market reaction to this slice of history in British politics, the ending of 14 years of Conservative rule. Also ahead, Alexandra Britton-Davis, partner at Saffery, getting her view on Labour's tax plans. And you can stay across all the latest developments, of course, on the terminal, on our T-Live blog, TLIV Go, on the Bloomberg terminal. Stay with us. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. Now, the UK's Labour Party has secured a majority in the country's general election, with leader Keir Starmer set to become the next Prime Minister. Outgoing Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has conceded the election following a disastrous campaign. The heavy defeat has seen several cabinet ministers lose their seats, including Conservative leadership hopefuls Grant Shapps and Penny Mordaunt, as well as Jacob Rees-Mogg. Chancellor Jeremy Hunt has held on to his seat. Let's check in on the market reaction. Have a look at what these results mean and could mean in the days ahead for UK stocks. Let's bring in Joe Easton from our equities team, who's standing by. And Joe, you're going to look and unpick what is happening in terms of the banking sector, the potential impact there, Joe.
That's right, Tom. So there's a couple of sector-specific things to look out for in terms of the banking stocks today. The first of all is NatWest. Now, remember, the government still owns around £6 billion worth of this company. It's a legacy from the financial crisis, a 20% stake, and the Conservatives did pledge to offload this via a retail share sale. Now, we'll wait to see what the Labour government decides to do with it. We still think they will sell it, but potentially they might do it to banks, and that could affect the price of what they actually get for that old lender that they own that big stake in. The second thing is how the Bank of England pays interest rates to the lenders. Now, Nigel Farage of Reform actually had a pretty radical idea of scrapping this and not paying this money to banks. But it's an important measurement in terms of monetary policy. And Rachel Reeves, who we expect to be Chancellor of the Exchequer, she probably won't do anything as big as that. She is a former Bank of England economist herself, so we do expect her to keep that in place, but it will be something that we need to watch over the coming weeks. But more importantly for these stocks is the overriding economic outlook, and we have seen a bit of an improvement in that over the past few months, and we've seen gains in the big four lenders here in London. The three listed in the UK, Lloyds, NatWest and Barclays, all seen pretty decent moves this year, and also Santander, remember, is the fourth biggest UK bank. Of course, it is a Spanish company. The big thing, though, rates coming down is now seen as a positive for the sector. Previously, we all thought interest rates go up, banks earn billions more in profit, but that became too much for them because it constrained the lending market. Last year, we saw a sell-off in bank stocks, but because now this government is potentially going to be a bit more stable, the policies aren't too different to where we were under the Conservatives, the market is thinking that the economy will start growing again, rates will come down, the lending market recovers, and we'll see that index, the banking index, coming back up to potentially the highs that we saw in 2022. It's all about stability, but as I say, there are those specific sector things, including NatWest and the Bank of England payments. Banking stocks, so today, could be on the positive side, in my opinion.
OK, really fantastic deep dive on another important sector for us, having done the house builders, now the banking sector. Joe Easton, brilliant analysis. Thank you very much indeed. Let's get more analysis and bring in Rajeev de Mello, Chief Investment Officer at GAMA Asset Management now in Singapore. With exposure to these UK markets, Rajeev, thanks for joining us. What are you going to be watching for? Are you adjusting your portfolio in light of this electoral victory for the Labour Party?
Well, as you mentioned before, and many of the other speakers have mentioned as well, this is really expected. So in terms of portfolio adjustments, there's no need immediately to make adjustments. What was surprising, though, was perhaps the margin of victory. And what does that mean for my investments in the UK is that it does give the Labour Party much more flexibility to move more to the left if it wants to. It campaigned on a very moderate, you mentioned the word continuity many times, very moderate economic policy, nothing too shocking. But with this margin of victory does give them room to do more. And that might be more difficult for markets to digest. But we wouldn't know that in the short term.
Okay, so that's a potential risk then, the risk, Rajeev, that they could tack to the left, given this majority. What would that risk look like for UK assets? Would this be a gilt exposure risk? Is this a UK equities story that would be exposed to that? How would you look at that potential shift?
Yes. Well, the first thing is that there might be some temptation to do more on the fiscal side. Of course, the lessons learned from the big sell-off under Liz Truss is fresh in everybody's memories. But that is a risk. That is a risk of more spending and issuance of gilts. We're already seeing the long end of many markets, including the US, now steepening with these expectations of a lot of spending. So that is a bit of a global story as well. And that could be a risk to the long end of the gilt market. In terms of the equity market, yes, different policies can be favorable in terms of growth. I think I agree with your former guest, Mansoor, on the fact that there's greater stability. That is definitely a positive for investors. However, with such a large margin and such a large number of seats, policies can drift more to the left.
So, Rajeev, what's the play on gilts then? Do you lean into the front end on expectations of a Bank of England cut but steer clear of the long end? How would you position around gilts?
Well, the market is already priced in rate cuts by the Bank of England. The Bank of England will start cutting rates. Now it's free to do so. It'll take its time. Central banks around the world are very cautious about cutting rates too fast. That's a general topic among all central banks, led by the Fed, which has repeatedly delayed the start of its easing cycle. The ECB cuts in June, but very reluctantly, probably because it had pre-committed more than because it really wanted to. So I think central banks are very constrained in terms of how fast they can cut, because their track record on inflation has been poor, and they're still in the process of restoring credibility, and inflation is still staying higher than they would like. So the Bank of England will be cautious.
Okay, Rajeev Mello, CIO of GAMA Asset Management in Singapore, with exposure to these UK markets, on some of the potential risks if, and it is still an if, of course, this new Labour government tax, incoming Labour government tax, more to the left. Rajeev, really interesting insights. Thank you very much indeed. Of course, how much is priced into these gilt markets as well, saying it's pretty much fully priced at the front end in terms of expectations around a Bank of England cut, with markets, by the way, pricing that in potential first cut in August. There's plenty more coming up. We're going to remain live, of course, outside the Palace of Westminster in London as Labour claims that victory in the UK general election, set for a significant majority, above 400 seats in the UK Parliament, and one of the worst electoral defeats for the UK Conservative Party in history. Stay with us. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back. Let's take a look now at how the Asian markets are shaping up this Friday. Cross over to Avril Hong, standing by in Singapore. Avril.
Yeah, Tom, we are seeing a really interesting picture emerging in FX amid a firmer pound that's leading to the downward bias in the greenback. Bloomberg dollar index at the lowest in a month, and amid this, we're seeing that climb in the Japanese currency. Not just among its Asia peers is it the best performing, it's also gaining ground against all its G10 counterparts. And it's the unwinding of the Goldilocks trades gets underway. Offshore yuan also showing that recovery. Flip the ball. Let's take a quick look at what we're seeing in the Asia stock markets, because the Chinese assets are the underperforming. Flip the board if we can. Take a look at how the CSI 300 and the Hang Seng is faring. Nikkei, of course, is erasing gains from earlier in the session amid the stronger Japanese currency. Kospi outperforming, helped along by Samsung Electronics, that is surging today, of course, after its big profit beat, raising optimism about how the memory chip demand is recovering, Tom.
Avril Hong in Singapore with a check on the Asian markets. Thank you very much indeed. The incoming UK Prime Minister then, Keir Starmer of the Labour Party, saying he is positioning this new government for a period of national renewal, coming through with one of the largest majorities, the largest majority, it seems, on track for that, at least as things stand, since 1997 and the victories of Tony Blair when he secured 418 seats out of the 650 in Parliament. This Labour government, this Labour Party, on track for 410 as things stand, just closing in on 400 right now. That is a turnaround of huge significance since, of course, 2019, when the Labour Party faced and suffered its worst electoral outcome in history. The Tory party, or seats in the 1930s. The Conservative Party facing up to its worst electoral outcome, potentially in history as well. The Prime Minister, outgoing Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, saying he takes full responsibility for that. The incoming Prime Minister, then Keir Starmer, talking about the need to address the responsibility that has been given to him and his party, given this significant mandate. We should also note that the Liberal Democrat Party have performed very well as well, so far notching up 65 seats, becoming the third party within this future Parliament. Reform as well, led by Nigel Farage, notching a couple of significant gains in terms of seats within this new Parliament. We keep across how all of this is unfolding. The change of power, the majority was achieved by this Labour Party just before 5 a.m. with that 326 level. They're now closing in on 400 seats, significant majority for the Labour Party. We keep across all of this for you and the market impact. Stay with us. This is Bloomberg. Good morning, this is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. I'm Tom Mackenzie. Outside the Houses of Parliament in London, these are the stories that set your agenda. Labour securing a landslide victory in the UK's general election, with voters turning on the Tories after 14 years in power.
We can look forward again, walk into the morning, the sunlight of hope, pale at first, but getting stronger through the day. We can look forward again.
UK equity futures point higher, the pound steady as investors herald a new political dawn in British politics. Plus, we have a great lineup of guests throughout the morning. We're going to bring you analysis and reaction throughout the day. The UK's Labour Party then securing a majority in the country's general election, with leader Keir Starmer set to become the next Prime Minister of Great Britain. Starmer says change is coming.
It's the guiding principle, everything we have done and must keep on doing. On the economy, on national security, on protecting our borders. The British people had to look us in the eye and see that we can serve their interests. And that work doesn't stop now. It never stops. The changes we've made are permanent, irreversible. And we must keep going. We ran as a changed Labour Party, and we will govern as a changed Labour Party.
Outgoing Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has taken responsibility for the disastrous result. The heavy defeat has seen several cabinet ministers lose their seats, including Conservative leadership hopefuls Grant Shapps and Penny Mordaunt, as well as Jacob Rees-Mogg. Chancellor Jeremy Hunt has held on to his seat.
The Labour Party has won this general election, and I have called Sir Keir Starmer to congratulate him on his victory. Today, power will change hands in a peaceful and orderly manner, with goodwill on all sides. That is something that should give us all confidence in our country's stability and future. The British people have delivered a sobering verdict tonight. There is much to learn and reflect on, and I take responsibility for the loss.
Britain's outgoing Prime Minister there, Rishi Sunak, taking responsibility for what could be the worst defeat for his Conservative Party in history. This was flagged by the polls, but it is nonetheless a significant milestone in terms of UK politics. We've seen the polling adjusting in the last 6 weeks, but suggesting that this would be the result. The Labour Party coming through with that majority, expected to take more than 400 seats in the Houses of Parliament. The UK asset market reaction and the pound and equity market futures, of course, on the back of this, relatively benign, given that this is essentially what the polls had indicated, with all the detail underneath, of course. But currently the pound is at 127. Very, very modest gains coming through, but it's a 7th straight day of upside for the British pound. You have seen inflows in terms of the equity markets as well. Bank of America in a survey there suggesting that fund managers are turning more constructive on the UK equity markets. FTSE 100 futures today, this Friday, pointing to gains of 0.2%. Let's bring in Alex Morgan right now for a closer look at the electoral results. Alex.
Well, good morning, Tom. There's nothing subtle about that, is there? This is our Bloomberg Live results tracker. And when you're looking at who's won, Labour, 399. We're expecting that to update any minute to cross the 400 mark. The Conservatives, the government of 14 years, languishing on 106, could be heading for their worst ever result. There's 100 different ways to read this, but let's look at Labour, the new administration. You're seeing here this huge majority on paper. In fact, when you put it on the map, you can see a sea of red from Scotland, where they swept aside the Scottish National Party, right the way down into the Conservative heartlands in the southeast of England. A broad sweep. But Labour also under pressure. It wasn't a story of rosy result in every single seat for them. Let's bring you up one in particular, where a member of the shadow cabinet, Jonathan Ashworth, was ousted by an independent. We can bring you up the result from Leicester South. Now, that is overturning a huge Labour majority in that seat. You can see there, coming down to a couple of percent between the two. The issue of Gaza costing Labour dearly. We saw that biting into their vote in a number of areas around the country. And there is a sense in which, yes, on paper, Labour has that hugely unsubtle, massive win. But actually, in many cases, the vote is fragile. They lost seats that they weren't expecting to lose. I think it's fair to say Jonathan Ashworth was expecting to be in government, not now looking for the next job. There is a sense then also that the Conservatives collapsed and people maybe went to Labour or other parties out of a sense of frustration. Keir Starmer, you could detect it in maybe his sort of first speech of the night that he's really trying to win people over, to bring people along, not sort of a triumphalist tone. And I think that is borne out by these results. Yes, a huge win for Labour. Yes, a landslide. The Conservatives looking like they're heading for a terrible result. But in many cases, that could be a fragile result for Labour.
OK, Alex Morgan with the important context, breaking down, of course, the electoral data for us as it continues to adapt and come through. And we'll be crossing over to Alex, of course, throughout the next few hours. Alex, thank you very much indeed. Now to other stories then making the news this Friday. And in Europe, of course, the focus shifting to the French elections, another big European election, of course, this week. Polls in France showing Marine Le Pen's national rally is set to fall well short of an absolute majority in the parliamentary election on Sunday. Let's get the details then in terms of how this is shaping up. Bring in Bloomberg's senior editor on EMEA markets, Phil Serafino, joining us out of Paris, of course, the French capital. Phil, where do we stand then going into the final day of campaigning over in France?
So, Tom, we have the latest poll numbers just in, and it confirms what you said. They're showing Marine Le Pen's national rally getting maybe 230 seats in the parliament in Sunday's vote. That's well short of the 289 you need for a majority. So, you know, the contrast with the UK election couldn't be more stark. Over there, you have a clear mandate for one party. Here, it looks like voters basically will not give anyone a majority, and it's going to create a real problem come Monday morning when it comes time to appoint a government. The polling that just came in shows Macron's party coming in third place, basically, maybe 140 seats in the parliament. Second place goes to the left-wing alliance, the New Popular Front. Maybe they get 190 seats. Assuming that comes to pass, when voters go to the polls on Sunday, France is facing something it has not faced before, where the president will have to decide who is going to run the country from among these three groups where no one has a clear majority. And it's unclear what's going to happen, whether there can be a coalition cobbled together from people in the center or whether there will have to be a minority government. So, yeah, the polls do show the national rally falling well short of a majority.
OK, Phil Serafino in Paris, thank you very much indeed. And of course, joining and drawing the distinction between what is happening electorally in France, where you look at a potential National Assembly that is jammed up in terms of the policy agenda going forward versus what could be happening in the UK Parliament, what is going to be happening in the UK Parliament given the sizable majority of the incoming Labour government, of course. Phil, thank you very much indeed. To the US now, where President Biden is heading into the most important weekend of his political career as he works to restore the faith of voters, donors and party officials. So far, Biden has refused to step down following his debate performance, which of course raised those concerns about his health. Bloomberg's opening trade anchor, Kriti Gupta, has of course been following all of this for us. Kriti, is the president going to stay in this race? Do we have clarity in terms of the pressure that he's under and what his calculation, the team as well around him, what their calculation is at this point?
Well, Tom, he's certainly trying to stay in the race. He's doing everything he can. In just the last 48 hours, ahead of that crucial debate, that crucial interview he's going to have with ABC tonight, 8 p.m. Eastern, he has been doing several radio interviews in many of the swing states, really trying to repair some of the damage that he did in that interview. But now there are a lot of questions being asked about what the alternative might be. Yes, Kamala Harris in particular has rose in some of the polls relative to Joe Biden, saying, with some Democrats really saying and pushing for her to take on President Trump in the general election. But the problem here is simply what comes after. How much did Kamala Harris actually know about Biden's health, and why didn't she speak up before? Simply because she has been a real advocate, and you've already seen that in the fallout of this debate story. Simply Gavin Newsom, Gretchen Whitmer, Kamala Harris, all of these potential replacements have come out over the last couple of years when Biden's health was brought to the forefront and really vouched for their party's leader. Now, for one of them to replace it would bring about questions. And that's really where not only the Democrats are worried, but where the Republicans and the Trump campaign is looking to target as well.
OK, Bloomberg's opening trade anchor, Kriti Gupta, with the latest in terms of the thinking around Biden and the potential Democrats who could take the helm if indeed he steps down. Of course, no decision has yet been made. Kriti, thank you very much indeed. To other stories now making the news this Friday. Let's cross over to Jen Zabasajah, who has a roundup. Jen.
Yeah, good morning, Tom. The U.S. economy is expected to add a solid 218,000 jobs for the month of June. This as the unemployment rate likely remained at 4%. Fed officials seem to believe the labor market is nearing an inflection point ahead of more rapid deterioration. Bloomberg Economics projects unemployment will reach 4.5% by the year end, and the Fed will begin cutting rates at its September meeting, followed by another cut in December. Also, Christine Lagarde says the European Central Bank would require additional reassurance that inflation is headed back to the 2% target before it starts lowering interest rates further. Speaking with Portuguese media, the ECB president urged Eurozone officials to remain alert, saying data on wages, profit, and activity should reinforce confidence that consumer prices are on a downward trend. ECB officials have signaled the bank is in no rush to follow its initial reduction in borrowing costs last month with another. And finally, the owner of Saks Fifth Avenue is acquiring Neiman Marcus Group for $2.65 billion in a deal that will unite two of America's largest high-end department chains. Amazon and Salesforce will help facilitate the deal by Saks owner Hudson's Bay, and the tech companies will take minority stakes in a new company called Saks Global. The goal of the deal is to cut costs and boost profitability by giving the new company bargaining power with vendors and reducing supply chain and other shared costs. Tom?
Jen Zabasajah, thank you very much indeed with the roundup of the other news this Friday. We appreciate it. Coming up, we're going to discuss non-doms and Labour's tax policy with Alexandra Britton-Davis, partner at Saffery. That conversation is next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. The UK's Labour Party has secured a majority in the country's general election, with leader Keir Starmer set to become the next Prime Minister. Voters turned on Rishi Sunak and his Conservatives, with the ruling party facing an unparalleled collapse in its history. Several cabinet ministers have lost their seats, including Conservative leadership hopefuls Grant Shapps and Penny Mordaunt, as well as Jacob Rees-Mogg. However, outgoing Chancellor Jeremy Hunt has held on to his seat. Moments ago, he was seen arriving at Downing Street. Let's get the view on what this could mean then for different slices of the UK equity market. Joe Easton is standing by in terms of what this could mean for UK utility stocks. You've done the banks, you've done the house builders for us. Joe, what about the utility stocks? What are the implications for that sector from this Labour majority?
So utilities, another really interesting sector to keep an eye on as these results come in, Tom. Now, there's two elements to this. First of all, it's water. Water's been in the news a lot because of all these spillages that we've seen in our rivers and companies pledging to fix the problem with billions of pounds of investment. Now, the Labour politicians, some of those politicians actually called for dividend restrictions until those measures are sorted out. And that has weighed on the stocks, as we can see on the screen here. Now, the other thing is energy, broader energy bills. The Labour government has pledged to build Great British Energy, a new renewable energy company owned by the state. There's not really much detail, though, on how they're going to do that. So the market is a little bit sceptical, but that has also weighed on companies like Centrica, SSE, alongside those water stocks like Pennon and United Utilities that have slumped. But the most important thing for this sector is the bond yields, because they've got massive debt loads. So if bond yields come up, inflation doesn't ease, that would be very negative. Now, the big drop that we saw back in 2022, we'll all remember, was the Kwasi Kwarteng Liz Truss budget. Bond yields spiked and the sector was hit hard. With the potential more stable government coming in, people will hope that we won't see another repeat of that. But that has been the key broader concern. It's the bond yield outlook. We don't want to see another point of that in terms of that sector. But, as I say, those sector-specific things, water, energy bills, key focuses for the Labour government. Tom.
OK, equities reporter Joe Easton with a lens on the utility markets, of course, the utility sector and what the impacts could be of this majority Labour government, incoming government. Joe, thank you very much indeed. Let's focus on tax now. Joining me for the latest in terms of how we should be thinking about some of the changes, at least in the view of some. Let's bring in our next guest, Alexandra Britton-Davis, partner at Saffery, with a focus on non-DOMs and other parts of the Labour agenda when it comes to tax. Thanks very much for joining us, Alexandra. A wet and windy day outside the Palace of Westminster on a slice of history nonetheless. The tax focuses have been on non-DOMs. It's also been on the proposed tax around private schools as well, at least scrapping that privilege that they've had in terms of VAT. It looks like that's in the manifesto. The Labour Party have said they're not going to raise income taxes, they're not going to raise VAT, and they're not going to raise capital gains. But there are parts of this economy which could be hit. Talk us what your clients are concerned about, particularly when it comes to non-DOM.
Yes, so the non-DOM regime, we've been told by Labour, is going to be abolished. And what they mean by that is the remittance basis of taxation that enables non-DOMs to keep their foreign income and gains overseas and not pay tax on them. They said they're going to scrap that and replace it with a more modern system, and perhaps one that's for a shorter period of time. So very, very much in line with what we heard from the Conservatives back in March regarding their plans for non-DOMs. OK, so to what extent is that already being kind of factored in by your clients, or are you saying how are they likely to adjust to that if it comes through? Yes, so certainly, the Conservative announcements are what we're basing our sort of advice on at the moment. And clients are concerned. If these reforms do come in from April 2025, it's a very short period in which for them to make changes to their lifestyles or what they do. Some clients are thinking of leaving the UK, others plan to remain here. But I think a lot of people are just waiting for that certainty. We have some now with a Labour government, but perhaps on the next budget we'll have a bit more. OK, so still
waiting for a bit more detail. We look ahead to the autumn statement, of course, the incoming Chancellor, Rachel Reeves. When you talk about looking at other jurisdictions, where are some of your clients focusing in on? What are the potential moves that they could be looking to make?
So other jurisdictions where they have these tax favourable regimes, such as Italy, is very, very popular at the moment, but also still Spain and Portugal, Ireland, and then those sort of classic offshore jurisdictions like Dubai are still very attractive to
Capital gains tax hasn't been completely ruled out by this incoming Labour government in terms of a change there. What could the impact be? How are you thinking about capital gains and carried interest around the private equity sector as well?
Yes, so on carried interest, they very much said they plan to move all carried interest to being taxed as income rather than capital gains. Now, that would suggest that they're not planning to raise capital gains tax to income tax rates, because otherwise there'd be no need for the change of private equity. But it is possible with such a large majority that Labour will be thinking about capital gains tax rates. Maybe they won't go to 45% in line with income, but perhaps back up to 28%, the previous top rate.
28%, is that not the current rate for capital gains, 28%? So they'd be looking to move it above to 45%, which is the top level in terms of income tax?
Yeah, so currently most capital gains are at 20%, 24% for residential property, and then 28% for private equity.
How many of your clients are freaking out about the VAT on private schools?
I would say people are looking at it. Some schools are taking prepayments. We'll have to wait and see if that actually works, given the change in law. But I think, to be honest, not too much, but maybe looking to see if they can make a saving if possible.
And do you get many clients coming to you and saying, look, do we trust them when they say they're not going to raise income tax, when they're not going to raise corporation tax? What other parts of this are you on alert for in the next 100 days, but also ahead of the autumn statement?
I think, income tax rates are relatively high already, particularly, compared to other countries. So I don't think we have a huge concern that those will raise. I certainly think the changes to the non-dom regime and capital gains tax are probably where we're going to see the changes as announced.
The non-dom regime and capital gains. Alexandra Britton-Davis, partner at Saffery. Thank you very much indeed with the take there on what some clients out there are thinking about in terms of adjustments to the tax regime with this incoming Labour government. Coming up at 7:15 a.m. UK time, I'm going to be joined, by the way, by Anna Leach, Chief Economist at the Institute of Directors. We're then joined by Anne Glover, CEO and co-founder at Amadeus Capital Partners, for more on the UK and wider markets. Stay with us. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back. Keir Starmer will be the next Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, securing that majority, and a significant majority, the biggest one for the Labour Party since 1997. Some big names falling in terms of within the Conservative Party. Most recently, Liz Truss, of course, former UK Prime Minister, losing her seat. Let's cross over to Alex Morgan for a closer look at the results. Alex.
Well, Tom, I notice it's raining there for you in Westminster. Of course, this election began in a downpour, and I can see at least you've got an umbrella. But look at this. When we talk about off the charts, yeah, this chart really is looking off the charts for Labour. We're seeing here, you can see 407 seats going to the Labour Party. I mean, eclipsing anything they got in 2019. The Conservatives, it looks like they're set for their worst result in modern history. Even if they pick up the remaining seats, they are not going to beat a total of 156, which, as I say, was their worst result. The Liberal Democrats have, well, more than 6 times the number of MPs they had at the last election. Why does this matter? It's a complete realignment of British politics, and it's going to set the tone for the policy discussions, the economic discussions for the next 4 years. Let's put it on a map for you and show you a sea of red from Scotland to the southeast of England. The Labour Party, really a triumphant night for them. The Conservative vote collapsing. Tom, you mentioned Liz Truss, the former Prime Minister. Let's not forget, 2 years ago, the Prime Minister, she lost her seat to the Labour Party. Despite this, though, there's a suggestion the rise in support for independent candidates and Nigel Farage's Reform Party means that actually a lot of the Labour wins are quite fragile. There's a sense people are frustrated. They're turning away from the Conservatives to other candidates. But also in the Conservative seats, certainly there's this rise of reform which has cost them dearly. And you can see here Nigel Farage in Clacton, who wasn't even standing at the beginning of the election, the leader of the Reform Party, architect of Brexit, picking up a seat in Clacton from the Conservatives with 46% of the votes. He's going to be a very vocal voice, and he says he's now coming for the Labour government. So, Tom, a complete realignment, really dramatic stuff.
Alex Morgan breaking down the electoral data for us. And to Alex's point, just because the polls are pointing to this headline result, do not let that distract you from the fact that this is a significant rewiring of British politics. Just think, this was a Conservative Party that had 385 seats at the last election and is now just above 100. Just before we wrap up here from Westminster this morning, here's how Britain's major newspapers are covering this historic Labour election win. The Landslide in the Mirror. The Sun says Britain sees red. The Times and Guardian playing it straight with the exit polls pointing to a Labour majority. Stay with us for more, of course, on the UK elections and the market reaction. We will be speaking with Anna Leach, Chief Economist at the Institute of Directors, and later Anne Glover, CEO and co-founder at Amadeus Capital Partners. Labour securing the majority, Keir Starmer, the next British Prime Minister. The opening trade is next. This is Bloomberg.